Hello and welcome to the Just Culture Spotlight. What is the first and what will hopefully be a series of webinars. We're going to see what the interest is like, but perhaps we might do it on a monthly basis if that's sufficient interest to people. And this first one we're talking about contractor management and how you can improve the contractor relationship through a just culture approach. The idea behind these webinars is to give people some information on various aspects of just culture and safety management, human factors, and give people an opportunity to ask questions about some of those topics. So for the purposes, the format for today is I'll go through some material on just culture and contractor management, and that will be sort of around 20 to 25 minutes. And then we'll have 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. But anywhere along the line, please do feel free to chuck any questions that you've got into the chat. And I'll try and keep an eye on the chat. And if I see a question, I might answer it as we go. But if not, then I'll cover it at the end. For the purposes of today's webinar, I guess a couple of basic assumptions. I'm going to assume that you have a general idea of what just culture is. I will touch on it very, very briefly, but happy to do another webinar specifically on that issue of exploring what just culture is, if that's something that people would like to see. The other thing I'll be assuming is that your organisation already has a just culture framework or is looking to put one in place, and you're looking at, okay, well, how can we extend that framework to contractors and how might we do that? So anyway, I'll get, without further ado, I'll get straight into things. So my slides in here. So in terms of the material that I'll cover today, I'll do a very brief introduction to what is just culture. Again, happy to do a webinar on that at some future point if people like some more information on that. I'll look at some different types of contractor relationship, what we would want to include contractors in our just culture framework. And then I want to talk about what that relationship, how just culture can assist with that relationship, both for contractors as individual or the workers working for contractors, and also contractors as organisations. So I'll look at both those levels, and then, as I say, we'll have a Q&A at the end. So very briefly then, what is a just culture? A just culture, there's a couple of definitions that I got on the screen that are commonly used, but basically the idea is that we take a non-punitive response to human error. We understand that even when people come to work trying to do their best, we're fallible as human beings and we will make errors and mistakes. So what it's about is taking a non-punitive approach to those, because we want to encourage safety reporting. We want to encourage people to raise safety issues, to put their hand up when they've made an error or a mistake, knowing that what we're going to be doing is trying to look systemically. What were the systemic causes of those errors? What can we fix about our organisational systems? What can we learn from what happened? But there's also a line that has to be drawn between acceptable and unacceptable behaviour. There is certain behaviour that does merit disciplinary response, but that line is well known and established. So that covers things such as deliberate harm or gross recklessness, things like that. So very, very basically, that's what a just culture is all about. So obviously, when we're talking about contractors, there are lots of different types of contractors and contractor relationships. And so I'm just going to sort of cover them in three very broad groups. Obviously, each individual contractor engagement may not necessarily fall directly in one of these buckets and will be slightly different, but as a general sort of overview, they tend to fall broadly into one of these three categories. So the first is labour hire, and that's really where we are bringing workers into our organisation to supplement our direct employees. So let's say, for example, that we've got a manufacturing plant that we operate, and we have workers in that plant, and we bring in additional workers to help, driving forklifts and things like that, to assist. And so when it comes to a just culture perspective, with this particular group, really it's about extending those same protections and responsibilities of a just culture to our labour hire staff, really pretty much just as we would to our direct employees, because they're on our site and we have direct control about what work they do, how they do their work, and so we really do want them to be part of our normal ecosystem, if you like. So really we want to treat this group pretty much largely as we would treat our direct employees when it comes to just culture. On the other end of the spectrum, what I've called project contractors, and this is where we've brought in some outside contractors to essentially to take over an entire part of our operations. So usually something that we don't normally do. So let's go back to the example of we're a manufacturing company, and maybe we are building a new warehouse, and might be even a completely different site. And we hand that site over to a construction contractor and subcontractors to construct that warehouse. And we're a manufacturing company, we don't do construction. And so we're basically handing over that entire site. And so there's very little interaction between our own workers and these construction contractors. They're on a different site, they control that site. And so there, when it comes to a just culture, where the interactions go is around that contractor performance level, the contractors as an organization. So that's really where our focus will be. And so later on in this webinar, when I'm talking about that sort of stuff, that's really where this comes into play when we're talking about contractors as organizations. Probably the most difficult one in some ways then is the independent contractors. And this is where we are bringing people onto our site that we control to do some specific work that perhaps that we don't do. So again, we go back to the manufacturing plant that we're running, and maybe there's some electrical work that needs done, some wiring or some maintenance on our machines, and we're bringing in outside experts to do that. And these workers are using their own expertise but are working alongside our own staff and in an environment that on a site perhaps that we control. And so this is where you have these levels of both contractors as individual workers and contractors as organizations both interacting. And so that's where I'll mainly focus this webinar in terms of how we extend just culture to them and how that can improve the relationship that we have with our contractors. So I want to briefly talk about the safety responsibilities then between us as an organization running a business and our contractors. So as an organization running a business, we have our own safety responsibilities. We have responsibilities to keep our own workers safe, those health and safety duties. And we also have obligations to ensure the health and safety of other people isn't put at risk by our own operations. So that obviously could be our work experience students, it could be auditors on site, and of course it would include our contractors. So the operations that we do is going to potentially have an impact on the health and safety of our contractors. Similarly, our contractors have their own safety responsibilities. The contractor is responsible for the health and safety of their own workers and anyone else that could be affected by the work that they do. And of course, it may well be that what they are doing is going to impact on the safety of our own staff and the other people who are on our site. So we each have our own safety responsibilities. And so really, when it comes to contractor management and safety, the things that we're really looking at is making sure that our own activities don't expose our contractors to health and safety risk, or rather that those are managed to as low as reasonably practicable. And similarly, our contractors have responsibilities to ensure that their activities don't expose our people to health and safety risks. And so this overlap will require us to cooperate to manage safety. So not by taking over each other's duties, we each got our own duties, but in order to fulfill our own duties, we will need to coordinate and cooperate and share information. So why is it important to include our contractors in our Just Culture framework? Well, the first is that we have, as seen in the previous slide, we have safety responsibilities, and we have moral or ethical obligations towards those contractors. We will potentially be exposing them to risk because, particularly in the case of independent contractors, they are on our site, working side by side with us. So we have legal and ethical obligations towards them. Secondly, of course, that is the fact that taking a just culture approach will significantly improve our relationships with those contractors. And I'll go into this a bit as we go through this webinar. But in the same way that a just culture enables our own direct workers to speak up about safety issues and mistakes without fear of blame and punishment, we want to extend this approach to our contractors, encouraging them to be open and to cooperate with us in managing safety. Because contractors in particular have very strong incentives not to raise safety issues or problems. Contractors rely on their clients, which in this case it would be us, for work. And so there's strong incentives then not to rock the boat, not to say or do anything that could potentially impact on their chances of future work. So there's always going to be strong incentives for them to not report issues or even to potentially actively hide problems or challenges. The other is that there can be a lack of control. These are people who are working on our site, the site that we control, and so they may well feel, well, actually, what's the point reporting anything? Because I don't have any control over about the environment that we're in. So kind of what's the point? So again, as an incentive to say, oh, it's not really worth bothering with. One other thing I should probably say about why we should include our contractors in our Just Culture framework is that not including them can also affect how our own direct staff see the organisation. If we're not extending both those protections and those responsibilities, that could potentially create trust issues with our direct staff, because they might not necessarily see the distinction between how we treat a contractor versus how we treat a direct employee, and what might happen to one, they might think could happen to them. So how can Just Culture help in individual contractor management? And broadly speaking, so here we're talking about contractors as individuals. So there might be a self-employed contractor. It might be a worker who is employed by a contractor. So how can Just Culture help in that individual contractor management? Firstly, by encouraging reporting of safety issues. So we extend the protections and the responsibilities of a Just Culture. And so by taking that non-punitive response to human error, by doing that systems thinking of looking for the systemic causes of error, we are encouraging reporting. And that, of course, means that it assists us in getting a lot better safety data, a lot more visibility about what's going on in our operations, because the reality is that if we're not hearing about mistakes and issues and challenges and problems, it doesn't mean they're not there. It just means that people aren't telling us about them. So that non-punitive response to human error encourages the reporting of safety issues, which is really, really important. Secondly, that just culture emphasis on organisational learning, that continuous improvement, where we're looking for where are the challenges and problems in our systems, and what can we learn from incidents or near misses that we can then use to improve our systems and our performance going forward. And of course, just culture facilitates getting that information in the first place. And so bringing that just culture focus allows us to leverage and respect the expertise of our contractors. So if we're doing manufacturing and bring in a bunch of electricians, we've engaged those outside people for a reason rather than doing it in-house. They have expertise that we don't have. And so they might, so when it comes to, for example, potential hazards or controls around electrical equipment, electrical work, they might have a lot of valuable information that they can share in terms of how we go about our work in and around electrical devices and electrical work going on. They're also potentially more likely to see issues that we and our people have become accustomed to and don't really see anymore. It's that outside perspective. That thing that we've kind of has been there in the background, and we've stopped seeing it because we're used to it. But someone new comes in from the outside will sometimes see those things that we've become blind to. So that can be really, really helpful. But it relies on that foundation of a just culture, so that people feel like they can report those issues or those things that they see, those potential hazards. And so that's why it's really important if we want to extend our just culture framework to contractors, that they're inducted into reporting systems, whether that's the contractor's reporting system or whether it's our own reporting system, depending on what the precise nature of the engagement and the relationship, but making sure they're inducted into how to report, what things we want them to report, when to report, what happens to reports once they've been submitted, how that actually works, who they go to, what's then going to happen, so that those consequences for reporting, what will and won't happen. So ideally that report will be looked at, it will be taken seriously, that they will receive feedback, that if there's an opportunity for systemic improvement, that will be taken. Things that won't happen, that they won't be punished or blamed simply for making an error or for pointing out or for raising a safety concern. If you have an existing, strong reporting culture, then you could potentially include your direct frontline employees who have made reports to speak to contractors in that induction about what their experiences was with reporting and how that was treated and the benefits of doing so, and maybe being able to allay perhaps fears that contractors might have coming into a new workplace, a new organization that they're not necessarily familiar with, and because they're going to need some confidence if they're going to report. Oh, my apologies there. So moving on then to talk about contractors at the organizational level. So here, what we're really aiming to do is apply the principles of just culture to our relationships with contractors at that organizational level. So some of the things we want to do, right up front is set those clear expectations. Be clear up front about who is responsible for what, and where and how you're going to work together and consult on safety matters. So that's really important to set those expectations, and that should really be a consultative or cooperative process. So again, we want to be able to respect and leverage their expertise. If they're coming in to do work on our site, they're going to have a much better understanding of the risks and hazards and controls around the particular expertise work that they do, that it would behoove us to take seriously and to incorporate and listen, so that we're both able to meet our own safety duties. We want to make contractor performance reviews a regular process. So maybe if it's a multi-stage project, maybe we do a review at the end of each project phase. But importantly, so that we're not doing these performance reviews just when things go wrong. Because what we want to do is to make sure that these kind of conversations are normalized and that they're not seen as punitive. And it's a similar approach to what we would hope that we would want to take with our just culture reviews in our own organization. We want to do our just culture reviews, not just when things go wrong, but reviews of normal work or of exceptional performance. So that these reviews, these learning reviews become part of our normal workflow. And so it's not, so it doesn't become something that just is a punitive thing that happens when things go wrong. We also want to use just culture principles when we're assessing the performance of contractors. Similarly to what we would do with an individual. So again, setting those clear expectations for safe work practices up front, so that contractors know the standards to which they're going to be held accountable, know how your just culture works and how it's going to apply to them. And again, make this a cooperative process. We want to be very careful about not assessing contractors on things that they can't directly control. So with individuals, we might differentiate between outcomes, which an individual worker may not necessarily be able to control, versus the quality of their own decision-making and actions. And so when we're talking about contractors, metrics like lost time injury rates can be something that they not necessarily have direct control over. And so we really want to think about what metrics we use and the impact that's going to have on reporting. Are we, if a contractor is thinking, if I report this injury, that's going to look bad for my LTI, and then so maybe if there's a way that I can get around saying anything about it, that is going to protect me and my own business. So we want to be very careful about what we're assessing our contractors on. So some other options for assessing contractors, things that they can control, are things like the quality of their responses to incidents, how proactive they're being about safety issues, their use of the hierarchy of controls, their engagement of safety leadership. So trying to find assessment criteria for contractors that they can directly control and influence. And it's also really important that in any assessment of contractor performance that we consider our own practices and identify what impacts that has as the client on the contractor's ability to meet the expectations that we've set. Have we made it difficult for them to work safely? Maybe our contractors have set up an exclusion zone around their work, and our own direct employees are continually breaching the exclusion zone. We're making it more difficult for the contractor by letting that situation happen to do their work safely. And that's putting both them and us at risk. So it's a similar sort of principle to what we would consider with an individual employee, looking at those system factors, the contextual factors. Why did it make sense at the time to do what they did? And we want to take that similar sort of approach to assessing contractors. We want to take a non-punitive response to errors. Obviously, there is still that line between errors versus malicious actions or actions of gross recklessness. But again, that acceptance that people will make mistakes at work, even when trying their best. So we want to take a similar approach, but really balance it with forward accountability for learning. Okay, this incident has happened. What can we learn from it, and what are we going to do differently in future? And encouraging our contractors to think in those terms as well, and rewarding them for doing so. and ultimately taking a cooperative rather than a hierarchical approach to the relationship. And with so, for example, when that's both in how we set up the relationship in the first place, it's in things like incident investigations, so perhaps including them in learning reviews and just culture processes, whilst obviously making sure that we're not taking over each other's safety duties. So that's it. That's all the material that I had planned. But basically, when it comes to sort of summarize, when it comes to contractors at that individual level, we're talking about extending our just culture protections and responsibilities to those individual workers. And when it comes to the contractors as organizations, we're talking about using just culture principles in how we approach that relationship, how we assess contractor performance. And so we're looking at both of those levels. So we've got a few minutes to finish up. I'm happy to, if anyone's got any questions, please do post them in the chat. And I see we've got one from Marlon. Hi, Sonny. How might biases affect how we perceive and treat contractors versus permanent employees in safety incidents? Yeah, it's a really great question. There's a lot of cognitive biases that can be around the place in safety, and probably the one that I think comes to mind most immediately is fundamental attribution bias, and that is where when we attribute things to other people as reflecting their own character, versus we reflect external factors to our own behavior. So to give you an example, if we're driving and we go to change lanes without checking our blind spot, and there's a car there, and we nearly cause a collision. If it's us driving, we are more likely to put that down to, it's been a busy week, we're a bit tired, we were distracted by something else. We're attributing it to the external factors. If it's someone else on the road and they almost cut us off, we're more likely to think they're a bad driver, or they're reckless. We tend to attribute it to their own character. And so similarly with our relationship with contractors, there can be a bias towards when it's our own people and our own organization. Well, we're under pressure. We've got lots of things that we're dealing with. When it's contractors, they don't care about safety. They're sloppy. And so that's something that probably we should want to watch for and try and recognize that and be a bit more curious. Well, hang on, what's the context of what's going on? So that's probably how I would look at that one. Let's see, what other questions have we got here? I think there was a question through the website. Does just culture mean that we can't terminate a contractor for poor safety performance? No, it doesn't mean that. We can sometimes we might need to terminate a contractor, but probably what we want to do is, before we take that step, is make sure that we are assessing them fairly before we take that step. So looking at those contextual factors, why does it make sense at the time, for them to do whatever it is that they did? Are there any ways in which we're making it difficult for them to work safely? Are we assessing them on things that we can actually control and influence? But so I think we want to work through some of those things first. But ultimately, yes, sometimes you might need to terminate a contractor. Particularly if there's basic safety stuff that they know they should be doing. There's been no good reason why they haven't been doing it. You've explored any potential contextual issues, and they don't display any kind of intention to do better in future. Then sometimes you might need to take that step, obviously for the protection of your own workforce and other people around. So. And probably got time for maybe one more question, because I'm conscious of time. How do we, this is also from the website, how do we protect contractors from retaliation or blame, especially their own employer? What if the contractor's own internal culture is deeply punitive? Yeah, that's a really tricky one. That's a very good question. I think you need to take a risk-based approach. What is the nature and the scope of the relationship with the contractor? How much exposure do you have to each other, as to whether or not you either engage in that relationship or continue to engage in it. It's something you probably want to look at in the, you might want to consider looking at culture in the selection process. What is their approach to safety issues? What is their safety culture like? Setting those expectations up front, because how they manage their own workers will impact on our safety performance and culture. And so our contractors need to know that that influence is there. And so, maybe we might need to make that a performance assessment item of how they will, what kind of culture that they will create within their own, with their own workers. There's a lot more to be said about that, because it obviously depends a lot on the nature of the precise nature of the engagement. So you might encourage them to adopt their own just culture policy. But I think probably one thing you want to make sure that you don't do is don't make promises to the workers of contractors that you can't keep. So you might be able to say to workers that of contractors that you're not going to take any adverse action against them for honest errors or mistakes or raising safety issues. But unless you've had those conversations with the management of that contractor, you can't promise anything that they will or won't do. So you want to be careful about that. All right. We're basically at time, a little bit over, but thank you very much for everyone for the question. There were some great questions there. Please, and thank you very much to everyone here for joining, and I hope you found this webinar useful and helpful. We'll plan to do another webinar probably on bridging law and safety gaps. Is probably the topic that we'll go with. Not sure when exactly that will be, maybe December, maybe January. So keep an eye out on LinkedIn or YouTube for that. In the meantime, if you have any questions around what we talked about or suggestions for a future webinar, you can go to the website. It's on the screen there, and when we finish up, there'll be a QR code as well, so it will take you straight there. So you can feel free to ask any questions there. Or if you have just a general just culture related question, you can put that in there as well, and there's an option to leave your email if you want to, and we'll get back to you on that particular question. But thank you everyone for joining today. I hope you found it useful. I hope you have a great week and the rest of the week and weekend, and hopefully see you next time. Thanks very much.